Palafin, if its Terra Water can deal massive damage. And another thing that Mattie Morgan is running is that Pelipper to set up the rain, and in that weather condition, of course, that water damage output is really nothing to be ignored.
Not at all. And the thing that Pontus is running, which we'll see in just a little bit, is that Baxcalibur that I'm very excited to be seeing. Look at Pontus having a great time behind the desk there, seeing the achievements coming up on screen. European Internationals Day 2 in 2018, and the Bremen regional finalist against another player. In fact, I correct myself, Maurice won in 2022. In fact, I was about to say the same year. But the 2019 Jönköping regional top 8 and Frankfurt top 16 as well.
Yeah, a lot of Bremen representation here in Malmö as we cast our eye over Mattie Morgan's achievements, and incredibly recent, not 4 weeks ago, EUIC top 16 there, as well as Bochum this year, World's Day 2 of last year, and another no stranger to a Malmö regional in Mattie Morgan back in 2020. So this should be a really exciting match.
I remember having a little bit of a chat to Mattie just a few minutes ago, him saying that like he gets really lucky in Malmö. I think he managed to squeak his way into the top cut of the Malmö Regional Championships last week, and then of course, like he is this time, proving that he deserves to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And making that call to bring rain in a meta where we don't see it quite so often. And yeah, these trainers with that Pancham mascot there for Pontus, he's looking fairly relaxed. He's looking like he's ready to get into this game, and we've seen time and time again this weekend how taking the pressure off yourself, if you're able to do that, it's no small ask.
Definitely taking the pressure off yourself. You know, maybe we need to tell Pontus to put some of the pressure, just like a little bit of it back on.
Yeah. This isn't Swiss round one, Pontus. We are now in the top 4. And here's his team. It's Fluttermane and Mungus, Arcanine, Palafin, Tinglu, and Baxcalibur. So yes, it is Palafin against Palafin, and perhaps Pontus might be able to utilize the rain that Mattie's Pelipper will set up for the benefit of his own Palafin.
Now, usually at this stage in the proceedings, I would be pointing out some things that are a bit different to what we kind of expect coming in, and really, there's not much different. It's just the way that Pontus has been piloting this team that has been so effective for him so far, and proving why it's a team to look out for going into this event. The one thing that we do need to point out here, though, is the choice of Terra on the Palafin. Same as Mattie, actually, opting for the Terra Grass, resisting effectively or making yourself a little bit stronger against Amoonguses on your opponent's end, and that's going to play a big role with that Amoongus on Mattie's side of the field as well. Yeah,
it really will, and Mattie is also running that Fluttermane and Amoongus, two pals who we've seen many times so far this weekend, Arcanine, Palafin, Pelipper, and Iron Hands. And it's interesting to, having seen Pontus's Arcanine with that Terra Grass, but it's also running the safety goggles, so it's sort of doubly immune to Spore, but crucially with that Grass Terra and the safety goggles as well, immune to the Rage Powder. But it's interesting to have the double up of both of that Terra type and the item choice there. Steel Terra type on Pelipper, interesting choice as well, very good defensive coverage, and Iron Hands, a Pokemon that we've seen running riot throughout days 1 and 2 of Malmö.
Speaking of that, Iron Hands, the heavy slam on this set has really been putting in work for Mattie, having that opportunity to be able to knock out a Fluttermane in one hit, especially since pretty much all Fluttermanes are opting for Terra Fairy to increase the power of their Fairy type moves. Usually pretty effective. There's quite a few key knockouts that you can get with that Terra type and the Moonblast and the booster energy and the GU that's usually paired alongside.
Yeah, this is a meta that's all about stacking, lots of stacking. We saw it just earlier when we were talking about Palafin's damage output. Rain, potentially Terra Water, potentially Hero Form, and potentially a Chi and Pow on the field next to it to reduce defense all around. But actually, looking at these teams, we have a Tinglu for Pontus, and that's it in terms of Treasures of Ruin for this particular matchup.
We have certainly enough treasures between these two players. The Tinglu will certainly have to do its part, but do vote in the Twitch chat right now for who you're supporting in this match, whether you're supporting your home nation of Sweden, whether you are wanting Mattie to be the underdog and take the crown. Do let us know and cast your votes right now.
Sweden and Ireland are also tied in Eurovision terms for the most wins. Can you tell I'm a fan of Eurovision, Ben?
I think I can tell just a little bit. We'll have to check back later on that particular point. But yeah, do show your support, and if you're friends of either of these trainers back home, of course, give them a little bit of a shout out in chat.
It's been so fascinating to see as the day has gone on. More and more of the Twitch polls have been becoming 50-50 in terms of the favour. The competition is heating up. It's really, really hard at this stage in the competition to call which of these players is going to win, and we'll have to see if your predictions are borne out in the results of this game.
Absolutely. The margins have never been tighter in the Malmö Regional Championships. This is all to play for now. We are deep into the knockout stages of this event, and we're going to be, having all of the players left in the tournament fighting for their tournament lives, and of course, fighting for that prestigious crown of Malmö Regional Champion.
Yeah, I think there's something even more prestigious about winning a regional that's already held in a region that's already held a regional. That's a lot of regions that I said there. But Malmö is a particular regional championship we've seen a few times, doing in fact 4. This is the 4th Malmö regional championship. So yeah, perhaps that has that little bit of edge in terms of prestige. You know, are you going to Malmö, the Malmö that we've all come to expect?
Absolutely, and joining the list of players that have been able to take the championships here. These players have swapped team sheets. They'll be busy locking in their teams, making those final decisions that will make the biggest impact in how this match unfolds. And I can't wait to see it as we go into game 1 of your first top 4 match. It's Palafin and Iron Hands for Mattie, and it's Baxcalibur joining the field with Arcanine for Pontus.
Yeah, there's that Dragon Ice type for Pontus there. A Pokemon that's incredibly powerful, new in Generation 9, and a Pokemon a bit like Golden Go, who we've seen relatively consistently throughout the regulation sets. It's never on absolutely everyone's team, but it always gets great results when it's run more or less. As these players lock in their moves, the stakes are really high now, and so they will be wanting to make every prediction correct as we get into turn 1.
And the Iron Hands is not going to be wanting to feel that pressure, switching straight out into the Pelipper. The rain is on the field already. Is this a time, Charlie, where we're going to see that Palafin go straight for an attack? I think it might be. The Will-O-Wisp hits into the Pelipper, gets that burn. It's going to be chipping away at that Pelipper for the rest of the day. Icicle Crush goes into the Palafin. It's a resisted hit. Does not do that much damage. Oh, and it's a flinch on the Palafin. That Arcanine must be feeling overjoyed right now.
Oh, yes. That Arcanine was about to take massive damage from we presume, a wave crash or some sort coming out into the Arcanine in the rain. Super effective hit. That would have been quite a lot. Going for the burn on the Iron Hands that was in there for Mattie originally, it instead hit that Pelipper. And I can only assume that the Icicle Crash was going into the Palafin, presuming a Terra, or perhaps a different Pokemon from the back for Mattie coming in. Hence the not very effective hit there. But this Palafin can still threaten very big damage. It would have to contend with a Will-O-Wisp potentially coming out from the Arcanine. Maybe Mattie's going to want to reposition it, get that Hero Form active, or maybe there's going to be a Terra.
There is going to be a Terra and no switches at all. We were talking about how useful that Zero Form Palafin is in its base form there, and maybe we'll get to see that this turn as we get a Terastallization from Pelipper on Maddie's side of the field. Steel type with the rain on the field is a great defensive typing. How coming out from Arcanine, boosting the attack of the Arcanine. Oh, and the Glaive Rush goes into that Pelipper. It is enough to survive the hit. We see that Palafin finally getting a chance to go for that Wave Crush and doing 50% to the Baxcalibur.
Absolutely ridiculous. Both resisted hits so far and both doing around 50%. Tailwind can be set up by the Pelipper. It takes a little bit of chip damage from that burn, but wow, it just goes to show the offensive prowess of Baxcalibur and indeed that Palafin. Of course, would have been a super effective hit into the Arcanine there, but perhaps Mattie is thinking this Baxcalibur is what's threatening me more right now.
Well, in the rain, the Arcanine isn't going to be doing too much damage. The Will-O-Wisp will be kind of stacking up its chip over time, but not really the threatening thing right now. So I really like the way that Mattie has played that, and especially with the Tailwind coming out now, with the Glaive Rush coming out from the Baxcalibur, it's going to have to be really, really careful about how it approaches the next couple of turns. Palafin, though, finally switching out for that Iron Hands.
Yeah, Iron Hands rejoining the field. Batskaba will be taking double damage from whatever attack is coming out into it now. Ice Shard is not enough to pick up the Steel Terror. Pelipper is Hurricane. This is surely going to be enough for the knockout.
And it's a knockout.
And it is. Batskaba goes down for Pontus. That is a big offensive threat he has, but it's now been lost. That Pelipper looking on very low health indeed. In fact, looks like around 1 HP, but it's been putting in so much work for Mattie so far.
Almost would have liked that Pelipper to go down that turn so that you can switch in the Palafin straight away, coming straight back in and taking the most use of the hero form under Tailwind, especially with the Fluttermane coming in from Pontus. Mattie definitely would have enjoyed having a really offensive, fast Pokemon in Tailwind that would be able to knock that out, but I'm sure in the rain that Jet Punch will probably be enough.
Yeah, Jet Punch is often enough. Where there's a Jet Punch, there is normally a way. We can see Pontus hovering over this Flare Blitz, debating whether it's going to be enough damage in this rain, whether it's worth going for. The Pelipper is going down at the end of this turn thanks to its burn. It would have to switch out in order to preserve it, to perhaps get one more attack off. And the first knockout is taken on Pontus's team. Will he have the resources to be able to clutch out the rest of this game? Of course, the Pelipper will be going down very soon as well, so nearly 3 Pokemon apiece for both trainers, but we see another Terror coming out. This time, it's for Pontus.
And it looks like it's going to be on that Fluttermane going for the Terra Fairy, increasing its damage and making sure that it can, do as much damage as possible to that quite threatening Iron Hands that has joined the field. Hydro Pump coming out from the Pelipper, boosted with speed from the Tailwind, is enough to pick up a one-hit knockout onto the Arcanine. Arcanine returning to its trainer, and Moonblast following up from that Fluttermane, of course, targeting down that Iron Hands and not picking up the one-hit knockout. Heavy Slam in reply takes a double KO. Mattie is absolutely taking this game by storm.
Yeah, he really is. The survival there onto the Iron Hands was massive. One can only assume that Mattie has been training his Iron Hands for a purpose exactly like that. Pontus is already down to his last Pokemon. Sure, Pelipper goes down, but it's got to be the MVP of this particular game. Tailwind, it's not a tech that we've seen so much in Regulation Set C. Murkrow with Tailwind was everywhere in Regulation Set A, and it just goes to show that perhaps it's being slept on at the moment as Palafin, in its hero form, rejoins the field in front of a not very happy Amoonguss.
No, Amoonguss is a Pokemon that tends to want to be supporting the Pokemon besides it rather than taking the spotlight here, and definitely not something that a place that the Amoonguss likes to be in. Yeah, in fairness, the Pelipper has gone down. That Hurricane would have done a lot of damage, and Iron Hands and Palafin are both going to have to use resisted attacks to be able to deal with it. Amoonguss, though, coming in for Mattie, and it's going to be a Wave Crash following up into the Amoonguss. In the rain does 50% to that Amoonguss. Yeah, a little bit of a munching on the Citrus Berry, but with no way to recover that health, I think the writing is probably on the wall here.
At least Amoonguss has that consolation prize of a little snack for its trouble. But yeah, that Wave Crash was massive even without the Terra Water. Palafin is going to be taking a nap, and it might be Amoonguss versus Amoonguss, or Mattie might be pivoting in his Iron Hands again. Tailwind is now done. Seems like Pontus is done with this first game as well. The battle is cancelled, and the first round of this particular round goes to Mattie Morgan.
Mattie Morgan taking the first game indeed, and yeah, I mean, if I was Pontus, I probably would have forfeited the turn before, if I'm honest. But I do like the style actually. Taking the time, a little bit of extra time to think about how to adjust going into game 2, especially Pontus had quite an early advantage with getting that flinch from the Icicle Crash on the Baxcalibur into the Palafin, and maybe delaying quite a lot of damage from Palafin to the early stage of the game. But Mattie had so much offense and so much power in his team in that rain-boosted Pelipper Pontus really needed to do a lot of work to be able to take those hits.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, Ben. The Icicle Crash, it got that flinch on that Palafin. Yes, maybe Pontus was expecting a terror from Mattie's Palafin, but the flinch chance was present as well. It's not something you want to rely on, unless you're running at a Dunsparce with Serene Grace, which we did see earlier today. But yeah, it was brilliant to see that Baxcalibur, but Pontus's resources were exhausted really quite fast, and there's got to be a way for Pontus to slow down the pace of this game, but something like a Ting Lu might not be the answer when normally it is, given it would be in the rain and taking massive damage from water-type attacks.
I think that's really key. The Ting Lu is one of the Pokemon on Pontus's team that's really designed to be able to deal with Pokemon like Iron Hands. Even if it's weak to things like Drain Punch and Close Combat, it can still do super effective damage in Stomping Tantrums. It can do half damage with Ruination, no matter what the state of it is, whether it's intimidated or burnt. And the rain on Mattie's side of the field is really denying that from being an option. Of course, there is the Flutter Mane as well, and we saw it do lots of damage, but without being able to take the one-hit knockout, even when you go for Terror, and the opportunity for the Heavy Slam that we saw in Game 1, it does feel a little bit uphill for Pontus here.
Yeah, that's crucial information for Pontus not being able to pick up that knockout. It is Amoonguss and Baxcalibur being led for him, and Amoonguss and Mattie, Amoonguss and Pelipper being led for Mattie. We don't see Mattie on the field, we see him in his little screen there. So a slower pace start to this particular game. Amoonguss doesn't love facing down a Pelipper on Mattie's side of the field, but if it can survive a hit, it could activate that Citrus Berry, go back, come back out with a Regenerator healing boost.
Yeah, we don't see either Palafin coming out in the lead here. It does make you question whether the Palafin is in the back for either trainer. And looking at this board state, there is the opportunity for the Pelipper to go for a little bit of setup with that Tailwind that we saw in Game 1, but that Baxcalibur doesn't have the opportunity to boost.
Exactly. It's going to be Flutter Mane rejoining the field, or joining the field for the first time in this game. It's getting a booster energy. It will be activating its special attack in particular. So more offensive now for Pontus as he keeps his Baxcalibur safe, perhaps playing slightly more passively in this game, having lost the first. He knows he has to stay in it to win it. Pelipper is able to set up a fairly free Tailwind in this position, and Spore was going down into that Baxcalibur. If it had been going into that Flutter Mane, that would have been a significant advantage already in the game for Mattie.
And a very, very good prediction at that. The Arcanine that Pontus had in does kind of showcase where the Spore is going to be targeted into, because it is carrying that safety goggles. So a wise protect there, and I really like the way that the Flutter Mane came in here. It's going to be under a little bit of threat from the Pelipper, of course, but both Flutter Mane and Baxcalibur will outspeed the Amoonguss, even in Tailwind on Mattie's side of the field, and so you can keep your offensive presence up even though you have the overall speed disadvantage.
Exactly. Speed control, as Pontus has learned from that Game 1, is absolutely crucial in this matchup. It's going to be Terra Steel again for Mattie's Pelipper. Really nice defensive option here, but it is now weak to ground type moves. And it's going to be a responding Terror for Pontus, and that will be coming out into his Pokemon of Flutter Mane, and that will be becoming the Fairy type. So a very popular Terror choice for Flutter Mane, boosting its offensive capabilities. So the tempo of this game has ramped up to 11 as Amoonguss goes for that Rage Powder. It will be redirecting single target attacks towards itself to keep that Pelipper safe. Hurricane will connect in the rain, of course, onto Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur still in the green of its health, down to about half, and Dazzling Gleam is going to be resisted by both of these Pokemon, but goes to show the power of the Terra Fairy. Pelipper still down to nearly half of its health. Icicle Crash, it's going to be a big hit, and Amoonguss is down for Mattie with a critical hit. I don't think that mattered there, but Mattie's main supportive option is down and out.
Down and out indeed, and that Hurricane damage was crucial there on the Baxcalibur, doing just less than 50%. That'll be inform what Pontus is able to do with the Tailwind up on the field. Mattie coming in with that late game or mid-game Palafin there, and I really like the way that Mattie's playing this Palafin. In the first game, using its Zero form to great effect. This time bringing it in the mid-game, which most players wouldn't even consider doing, and I think that's a really great time to bring it in. We saw how much damage it did in the rain previously, and could even be enough to knock out this Baxcalibur with a Wave Crash. And if that's the case, I wouldn't be surprised if this Flutter Mane would even go down as well.
Yeah, exactly. Palafin is really threatening some massive damage, and it's not even in its hero form yet. That's still a capability present for Mattie. Arcanine is going to come back in place of that Baxcalibur. A really risky switch, given it's facing down the Palafin. Yes, it's, oh goodness me, it's a Jet Punch, and it's not enough thanks to the Intimidate drop. So clearly Pontus had calcs for something similar to that, but it's not going to be able to survive Hurricane as well.
Knocking out the Arcanine and sending it back to Pontus. What a great double up there coming out from Mattie. Dazzling Gleam going into these two key Pokemon, not picking up the KO on Palafin and taking Pelipper dangerously low. Dangerously low.
These Pokemon are both on very similar levels of health here, and yet that Arcanine being knocked out immediately on the switch in. I mean, the Intimidate was fairly useful onto that Palafin. It still has that drop, and it might pay dividends going into this turn, although Flutter Mane is not known for its physical defense. Mattie still has the speed advantage with that Tailwind. Flutter Mane is threatening big damage on the field, and it is at full health.
Indeed, but with that Amoonguss coming into the field, Pelipper's going to have to, do a little bit of work here, because that Palafin can be redirected. The Steel-type Terror on the Pelipper stops the Grass-type Terror onto the Palafin, and so this Amoonguss is in a really key position here, and Pontus, it's down to Pontus to really figure out how to protect it from any more damage.
Yeah, Mattie is going to keep that Palafin in the back, keep it in his back pocket as Iron Hands comes out onto the field. Not only a very bulky Pokemon, but a very offensively threatening Pokemon. Pelipper is going to protect itself in order to get Iron Hands in slightly more safely. It's going to be Pontus going for a protect on the Flutter Mane as well. So will Amoonguss have called a Spore, I was going to say, onto that Iron Hands, but no, it was going for a double protect. And very fortunately, there was no damaging move coming into it this turn, so it's able to cling on.
And now the fake out is in play from Iron Hands on Mattie's side of the field. A key detail of that last turn is the protected fail on the Amoonguss. That means it's got a 100% chance of going into anything it likes this turn, or not being able to protect this turn. Fake out going into the Flutter Mane. It's a Hydro Pump follow-up. Is enough to pick up the knockout there in combination with the fake out, and that's Flutter Mane going back to Pontus, and we get a similar position to game one, where that Amoonguss is the only thing left on the field. Baxcalibur is in the back at half HP, but it's got a lot of work to do.
It's got a lot of work to do. At least the main offensive threat here is now asleep. The rain has stopped for Mattie, but of course Pelipper could just switch out to bring that Palafin back in, and then you bring in the Pelipper once more, perhaps in place of the Iron Hands, to get it in its ideal conditions. I wouldn't say it's impossible for Pontus in this situation, but it's certainly an uphill struggle, and he's going to have to be really careful as to what move he clicks here. We know from game one how much damage that Glaive Rush does, for example, but then, of course, Baxcalibur is more vulnerable the next turn.
It's all down to this Amoonguss having full HP and the Terror being committed onto the Pelipper by Mattie. I think we've seen that this Baxcalibur is in fact faster than the Pelipper and will be able to act first, and thus the Pelipper deciding to keep itself safe from any further attacks this turn. Glaive Rush going into the Pelipper, a reasonable target there, certainly from Pontus, and the Pollen Puff, I would imagine, will be following up from that Amoonguss into that Baxcalibur, getting it back up to full HP, and suddenly Pontus looks to be in a great position.
Yeah, he's got that supportive redirection on the field next to a heavy offensive threat, and that's kind of Amoonguss's ideal conditions, especially with that Iron Hands asleep there. Of course, Pontus will have wanted to take out the Pelipper while Iron Hands took its mandatory turn of sleep, but it is a slower Pokemon, so, you know, there is a chance the Baxcalibur will be acting first, but picking up a one-hit knockout on an Iron Hands is quite the tall order. As we get into this next turn, will Iron Hands be able to wake up and threaten that Baxcalibur? Let's find out.
Well, first we're going to see a double protect attempt from Mattie, which doesn't, of course, go through here. Rage Powder following up from the Amoonguss, just keeping Baxcalibur safe from any harm, and certainly after that Glaive Rush going into the Pelipper, the Baxcalibur will not want to be taking damage from any sources doubling due to the secondary effect of that move. Iron Hands continues to take a nap, Charlie.
I don't know if you feel that in the air, Ben. Can you feel that? That's a hero hero rejoining the field. There's Palafin. Here it is on its hind fins, standing up, ready for action, hands on hips, and it doesn't like facing down an Amoonguss. Baxcalibur, yes, it resists its attacks, but as we've seen, wave crashes coming out from Palafin can deal significant damage to that Pokemon either way.
It depends on how this Palafin is trained in comparison to the Baxcalibur as to whether each Pokemon will be able to move first as Rage Powder goes into the Amoonguss. Iron Hands takes more than 50% damage from that Baxcalibur, and a Wave Crash follows up into the Amoonguss, doing about a third of hit point damage onto the Amoonguss, and it's a follow-up with a Heavy Slam and nearly picking up the KO, but Amoonguss is going to be snacking on that Citrus Berry, taking itself up to about half HP.
Yeah, exactly. This is, all of a sudden, this could go either way, really. Baxcalibur here is on full health. You've got Palafin and Iron Hands, and what a late game. This hero could not have arrived at a better time for Mattie Morgan. Amoonguss is still there, crucially not knocked out, and it's able to provide ample support for Baxcalibur, which is exactly what we're seeing now.
Another Rage Powder coming out from that Amoonguss, keeping that Baxcalibur safe. A Glaive Rush is enough to pick up the KO into Iron Hands. Pontus must be feeling great about that Iron Hands no longer being on the field. Wave Crash follow-up, and it's not a KO onto the Amoonguss. The last opportunity for Mattie to break into this game did not quite go through, and of course the Palafin does faint to the recoil. It will be going, ladies and gentlemen, to game 3, Pontus Westerlund versus Mattie Morgan.
What a masterclass in stalling out that game there and playing to your outs, because it was looking in Mattie's favor again, and of course he had that confidence boost from having won game 1. But you know, Amoonguss next to its partner Pokemon being able to heal it up is absolutely ideal for that Pokemon, and I'm still staggered by how much damage that Glaive Rush was doing to Iron Hands, which is known for its HP and defense.
And what a position to be launching out Glaive Rushes in. I mean, we see the Baxcalibur on the top tables, you know, somewhat frequently, and we normally don't get Glaive Rush after Glaive Rush after Glaive Rush just because of that secondary effect. You don't want to launch out a Glaive Rush and take double damage back, so usually you have to keep yourself a little bit protected, but that little Amoonguss did so much work in that end game for Pontus, allowing those Glaive Rushes to just keep on flowing.
Yeah, absolutely, and for Mattie now, this Baxcalibur really is a thorn in his side, or should I say a glaive in his side, that he's really going to want to remove, because that would be quite painful, I imagine. So he's going to want to be targeting that down, and knowing that even one of his bulkier options, that Iron Hands, can't take the Glaive Rush particularly well, is really useful information. He might, of course, be able to catch a Glaive Rush with a Fluttermane switch-in, which would be immune to that, whether it terrors or not, given it is that fairy type. But perhaps Fluttermane is the key here for Mattie, but then again, for Pontus, his Baxcalibur has that Terra Poison type, so it's not a guaranteed Dazzling Gleam or Moonblast super effective hit into that Pokemon.
Not by any stretch of the imagination. And yeah, speaking about adjustments going into game 3, these trainers have really got to rack their brains, dig out everything that they can, and come back fresh. It's one game of Pokemon to decide the fate of these two trainers and their tournament lives here. I'm wondering, you know, looking back at that game 2, whether Mattie really made life harder for himself with going for the Terra into that Pelipper. If it was the Terra Grass onto the Palafin in that end game, maybe there's a completely different game there.
Yeah, it's true. It worked very well for him in game 1, but it goes to show how you don't just want to repeat what you do in game 1, because your opponent will be switching it up as well. But it's going to be Palafin and Pelipper being led for Mattie, and it's Palafin and Baxcalibur for Pontus. Let's get into this game 3. Which of these trainers will be victorious in this semi-final match?
And which of these Palafins will be advancing, of course, to the final position here. Both Palafins staring each other down, even helpfully on the same side of the field, so they don't even have to turn to lock eyes.
Exactly. They're looking very serenely at each other, but don't be fooled by that cutesy smile. This Palafin, as we've seen, can deal a huge amount of damage. It's going to be Mattie's Palafin withdrawing first, the good old-fashioned way to get that hero activation when it joins the field again. Amoonguss is going to come in here. Pelipper keeping itself safe, not setting up a Tailwind yet for Mattie. And it's going to be Baxcalibur attempting a Glaive Rush into that slot. So a really good call there by Mattie. More positional so far, but slowly but surely the intensity is ramping up as Wave Crash was also going into that protecting Pelipper. So again, really good call by Mattie.
covering the Terra or not Terra. To Terra or not to Terra, Charlie?
Yeah.
Bravo. Bravo indeed. Pelipper going for the protect there, just making sure that it didn't have to make that choice until Mattie could scout out what Pontus was thinking in that moment. Now, a lot less under threat with that Amoonguss on the field, certainly can redirect attacks away from both of these Pokemon. But if Palafin on Pontus' side of the field decides to go for its Terra Grass, maybe Pelipper still has to worry a little bit. Speaking about Pokemon worrying about their fate in the next turn, that Amoonguss is feeling probably a little bit threatened by that Baxcalibur in this turn. So we'll have to see whether it goes for its Terra or not.
Yeah, it's trying to keep a cool head, but Amoonguss is going to be joining the field for Pontus as well. Big Glaive Rush into Mattie's Amoonguss. It takes it down to about a third of its health, but it will activate Mattie's Berry on the Amoonguss, so back up to just above half of the health there. Hurricane is a really good prediction by Mattie. It goes straight into Amoonguss for Pontus, but it does not get the knockout, and it's going to activate that Berry for Amoonguss. Is there going to be a chance of confusion? However, that would certainly be frustrating, but no, it's going to be kept safe. Spore going into Pontus' Baxcalibur, and that's a really big threat taken care of for now.
What a double read there coming out from Mattie, getting the Hurricane on the Amoonguss on the switch in, but also getting the Spore into that Baxcalibur. The Amoonguss was under such threat of an Icicle Crash coming out from the Baxcalibur, but Mattie held his nerves and just went for the Spore, didn't commit the Terra too early like in the last game, and just making sure that he's doing as much as he can in this game to stop that Baxcalibur, which swept him last game, and keeping it in check.
Now that's interesting. It is Arcanine joining the field for Pontus, and as we know, Arcanine is holding those safety goggles, so it would have been a good switch in order to prevent any sleep coming into Pontus' team, but of course that would have prevented a Glaive Rush coming out from Baxcalibur. Iron Hands is going to join the field in place for Mattie instead. It's not going to receive an Intimidate drop thanks to the way these speed interactions work, but Baxcalibur is going to take a turn of sleep. Tailwind can now be set up by Mattie. It's nearly time for Mattie to start sweeping.
It's going on the offensive, certainly very, very soon. The Iron Hands coming in gives a little bit of a fake out to Mattie as well. That gives Pelipper the opportunity, if it wishes to leave the field. And what I'm wondering is, if this Pelipper actually stays in and goes on the offensive, how is it going to target? Do you Hydro Pump into the Arcanine, or do you maybe try to go for a cheeky Hurricane into this Arcanine on the potential Amoonguss switch-in?
It's not a potential Amoonguss switch-in anymore, Ben. That is definitely happening, albeit in place of the Baxcalibur. Will Mattie have called that? Only time will tell. Arcanine is going to keep itself safe on this turn, scouting out for what Mattie is going to choose to do here. Oh my goodness, he did it. It's Hurricane onto Pontus' Amoonguss.
2 for 2.
And it's down. Pontus' main supportive option is down and out for the count. And what a couple of turns of reads there for Mattie, and Drain Punch was going into that, protecting Arcanine, but yeah, Mattie, I don't know if he's used Terra Psychic on himself, but he's certainly making some reads.
Not on this team, but maybe outside of the game and on the desk. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you've got one game of Pokemon and that game of Pokemon determines whether you're going to go into the finals, you've got to be willing to risk it all, and certainly Mattie going 6-3 in day one has yet to be defeated thus far in the tournament, having an incredible run, and we are seeing exactly why that is.
This is why it's so important to practice your matchups against a wide variety of teams, because you know when it is the right time to risk. You know when you might be able to make those reads. And yeah, for Pontus, he was just on the back foot there. And at this stage of the competition, you've really got to stay alive to all of these possibilities as we get into this next turn. And a hero Palafin protects.
Yes, just making sure no damage is coming out while Arcanine has the opportunity to set up a howl here, but not before the confusion comes out from this Hurricane on the Pelipper. If this Arcanine hits itself in confusion, not only will it go to less than half of its health, but it also won't get that howl off. Fortunately for Pontus, that howl is going off, and this Palafin in the rain is looking absolutely fearsome.
Ooh, and that Arcanine survives on 2 HP in that Drain Punch scenario from Mattie there. So Arcanine will be around for at least one more turn. He could cycle it out for an Intimidate in favor of his sleeping Baxcalibur, or he could go for another Howl. But yeah, this Arcanine clearly trained incredibly well in order to take that particular move.
definitely is. And my question is how much damage is this Wave Crash or Jet Punch going to do?
Yeah.
If we were still in the rain, wouldn't be actually shocked if the Palafin in this position would be able to one-hit knock out the Pelipper even with a resisted hit. Now that the rain's there, maybe Mattie's Pelipper has a little bit more room to breathe, but certainly with the tailwind ending, the Pelipper isn't the fastest thing on the field any longer.
Yeah, the rain is now gone as Mattie's own hero, Palafin, joins the field. What's the best way to fight a hero? With your own hero. No villains here, just two heroes on the field as another tailwind attempts to go up for Mattie. That's not going to work. Is Arcanine going to be able to hit through confusion at this point? It is with another house, so this Palafin is looking very threatening indeed. And this is a really good way for Pontus to get himself back in this game.
It really is, because that Wave Crash is going to go into the Palafin. When two heroes stack up against each other, who will be the victorious? It's not going to be Pontus's this turn at the very least. Palafin hanging on with just a sliver.
Yeah, Mattie's going to be kicking himself there because he tried to set up Tailwind before it had expired for him. It's now expired, so now would be the time to use it. Really quick Jet Punch there into Pontus's Arcanine. It goes down. He's down to his final two Pokemon, but they are big offensive threats. Unfortunately, one of them's asleep. Another Wave Crash comes out from Pontus's. Palafin, but Pelipper is able to survive an invisible focus sash. Apparently, their Tailwind can go up from Mattie. This is coming down to the wire. Mattie still has all four of his Pokemon remaining, but you can't ignore the damage output on Pontus' side.
And with that Wave Crash onto the Pelipper and the Palafin before, this Palafin on Pontus' side of the field is not looking particularly healthy. Now that the Tailwind is up on the Pelipper, on Mattie's side of the field, this Pelipper will outspeed the Palafin. The Palafin on Mattie's side of the field will outspeed the Pelipper on Pontus' side of the field. That's going to give Jet Punch priority to Mattie's Palafin, and that could be crucial as these two Palafin match up against each other.
Yeah, Baxcalibur is going to continue its nap. It's time to wake up, Baxcalibur. Palafin on Mattie's side is going to be able to be taken out by Pontus's own Palafin, and Pelipper is clinging on. It connects the Hurricane despite not Rain being active, and it's enough for the knockout onto Pontus's Palafin. So, wow, that was a really risky turn, but it turned out well for Mattie. That Hurricane only had 70% accuracy without the rain.
Absolutely did, and it's Iron Hands, of course, as the last Pokemon. No, the Amoonguss is still healthy
in the back,
in the back as well. And yeah, Pelipper is going to be withdrawing in favour of that. Iron Hands versus a Baxcalibur is certainly a time of day that favours the Iron Hands, as the Baxcalibur continues to take a nap. He's like, hey, hang on a second, I don't feel very good about playing up against this Iron Hands. I'm just going to stay asleep. Wake me up when it's over.
Wake me up before you go. And unfortunately, Pontus Baxcalibur has an incredibly long nap, but that will be incredibly frustrating for him. If it's any consolation, of course, he was going to be fake outed that turn anyway, so would have flinched. But Pontus has reserved his Terror for a really good moment here with that Poison, a really good defensive Terror type. That Baxcalibur should be waking up this turn, but it's going to be a responding Terror, incredibly late game. Couldn't really be any later in the game to see these Terrors coming out. It's going to be onto the Amoonguss. It will become that electric type, a tech that we've seen throughout this Malmö Regional Championships, and not one we've seen too much before.
Amoonguss has an idea of how it wants to proceed in this turn. As a Drain Punch goes out into this Baxcalibur, Iron Hands in Tailwind is fast enough to outspeed it. Icicle Crush going into the Amoonguss, not going to be able to pick up the knockout because it is no longer weak to it. And Baxcalibur going for another nap here. There's certainly a few turns left before this Baxcalibur will be knocked out by the Iron Hands and the Amoonguss, but what a well-played game from both players.
Yeah, incredibly well played. Of course, now Iron Hands' electric types moves will be neutral into the Baxcalibur, where they were resisted before, but the Drain Punch is not very effective given the Poison Terror type. Baxcalibur is clinging on there, but with this Amoonguss there continuing to Pollen Puff into the Iron Hands is going to keep it really healthy, and that Baxcalibur did not have the damage output it needed into the Amoonguss.
Not even in the slightest, and Pontus locked in the forfeit. Mattie Morgan will be your first finalist in the Malmö Regional Championships. Congratulations to Mattie. He's played so well all day. Pontus unable to take the crown in his own country, but I'm sure everyone back home that has been supporting him will be very proud that he's got so far.
Yeah, everyone is incredibly proud of Mattie here. I mean, top 4 is no small achievement, especially in such a stacked regional championship. Absolutely thrilled for Mattie, and you know, he made the adjustments he needed to going into game 3, and it was a really close call, but I feel like the MVP in that last match was actually his Amungus being able to dish out those spores at the crucial moment.
A crucial moment indeed, and just this is the really the match of the players holding their nerve. I mean, in Game 1, we saw that Mattie took a really commanding lead, was able to dispatch all of Pontus's Pokemon quite quickly. Pontus holding his nerve, coming back, taking Game 2, and Mattie coming back into Game 3. One game to decide who of these players is going to be going into the finals, and Mattie just taking a read on Pontus turn after turn after turn.
Yeah. It was such impressive play there. And yeah, Pontus did feel, unfortunately, very much on the back foot. What he did realise after that game too was his Baxcalibur was such a threat into Mattie's team. So he really tried to get in the right position. It took as long a sleep as it possibly could, unfortunately, for Pontus. Had it woken up sooner, maybe it could have made the margins that much closer. But as long as you have... In fact, it sort of worked out both ways, because at the end of that game, we had Amungus and Iron Hands next to each other. And in previous match, we had Amungus and the Baxcalibur next to each other in Game 2 for Pontus. So, Mattie giving Pontus a taste of his own medicine.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a parallel there between the ways that these two trainers operate. And actually, one of the ways that these sort of teams tend to find their way into an endgame. Amungus is just such a prominent threat, and for very, very good reason. One thing I'd really like to call out in that third game was actually that both players held off their terror until at the end. We've seen so many rounds in the Malmö Regional Championships have their terror used right at the start, right? You get onto the field, you see a threat, it looks pretty threatening, you think, hey, I'm going to have to do something about that and go for my terror. That can come back to hurt you in the late game, where both of these players showed such restraint in the way that they played the Game 3. It was obviously Mattie that managed to get to that end game and was in the winning position, but I just thought, both players did really well in doing so.
Yeah, you're required to hold your nerve quite a bit in reserving your terror, but very often works out in your favor. I'm reminded of Dynamax from Generation 8.
Yeah.
As the season went on, we really saw that the players who held their nerve and withheld their Dynamax for the late game and letting their opponent get it out the way early tended to come back and get that win. And that's clearly something they were both going for here. But, if you're both saving your terror till the end game, then, it's a level playing field.
It certainly is. When you're holding your terror like that, you have to do so knowing that you have the right resources in the back to be able to still knock out your opponent's Pokemon. And I think if Pontus was able to use his terror a little bit earlier in Game 3, then maybe it would have been a little bit of a closer margin between these two trainers. Mattie really had the advantage because all of the damage was really on Mattie's side. That's the way that Mattie was approaching his team building coming into this. And we talked about Rain before, and that Palafin going into its hero form. It's just unbelievably powerful.
It's unbelievably powerful. It really is, even in a resisted hit. It's absolutely staggering. And I'm just glancing down at Pontus' team there because, of course, he had that Terra Grass on his Palafin. He had the safety goggles on his Arcanine. And in the end, it was that Spore that caused him the most trouble. But he did have the resources on his team. So, I don't think it's a fault of the way the team was built. I just think, maybe in the heat of the moment, Pontus was leaving himself vulnerable to those Spores, unfortunately.
Certainly. And one of the Pokemon that really did well for Pontus in Game 2 was that Fluttermane, doing so much damage with the Terra Fairy, absent from this particular Game 3. So maybe a little bit of a mind game between these two players. It was like looking at it thinking, hey, I brought the Fluttermane in the previous game. It did really well. Maybe Mattie's going to adjust a little bit, maybe not bring that Iron Hands that was so threatened by the Fluttermane, and therefore maybe if I leave it at home, I'll be doing a little bit better against the Pokemon that Mattie could adjust to.
Yeah, exactly. It's and that's such an important thing to call out, Ben, the fact that going into games 2 and 3, chances are your opponent is not going to do the same thing every single time. It might do if it was incredibly overwhelming, but this is why it's so important to have multiple modes for your team, multiple ways of working, because if your one option for heavy offense, for example, goes down early, then what are you left with?
What are you left with, indeed? In the case of this game, Mattie kept his heavy offense and was left with quite a bit left in the tank. One of the things that I wanted to find out a little bit more about was that Terra Electric on Amoonguss. We'll see if Mattie gets the chance to talk about that as he is ready to be interviewed. So we're going to kick it straight over to the couch where we'll hear from our winner from the top 4 bracket and your first finalist in the Malmö Regional Championships, Mattie Morgan.
Hi everybody, thanks Ben for that handover there. My name's David Partington and of course I am joined by the finalist now of the Malmö Regional Champion, Mattie Morgan. Mattie, how are you doing now?
I'm very exhausted, but I'm really adrenaline fueled at the same time. It's kind of hard to explain. I'm really happy though overall. I don't even know what to say.
Yeah,
really.
that's so many emotions. Yeah, obviously, like you must be feeling so overwhelmed right now. Like talking's probably the last thing on your mind, to be honest. But like, it was a really cool match to watch as well, especially from a team that seems so unusual that you were using. Like you've got Rain, you've got no Treasures of Ruin. It's a very strange team, to be honest. Like compared to what else we've seen today. What's kind of like inspired you to kind of use this team today?
Well, I wanted to work on my balance team from EUIC, which had. It was actually the same team, but I had Chiempa Dragonite instead of Pelipper and Iron Hands. But like, this changes completely, makes it look like a different team. So, yeah, I think it does better into like Sun and Hail teams that I used to struggle with. Mainly, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And it's particularly that Terra Electric Amoonguss, which I think lots of people are wondering about. Like, what was the thoughts behind that one?
Well, a lot of my Pokemon are weak to Freeze Dry from Iron Bundle, and Electric is just like a really neutral type, so most people use Terra Water because it has like nearly no weaknesses, but you keep the Freeze Dry, which is no good for my team. And it's good to have a Flying Resist as well.
Yeah, like I think that's really smart actually as well, because especially if you want to redirect those flying moves away from pretty much anything, because like a Terra Blast Dragonite can be very powerful, I bet, right? Is there anything that you particularly struggled with then over like day 1 or day 2?
In particular, I don't know if there were any teams. I definitely think I'm playing better today.
Going undefeated today, by the way.
I don't know, like yesterday I had a lot of bumps. I think some games I wasn't great. I got really, really lucky and made day 2 at 31st place. I did 32. But, I don't know.
Yeah, it's all right. No, it's fine. Yeah. No, to be honest, it's a tough question because you're in the final of the Malmö Regional, so there's not going to be a lot of things you probably struggled with. So, congrats on getting this far so far. That's all right. And the match itself versus Pontus, did you feel any? Did you have that game plan going in for like the Terra on the Pelipper, for instance? And
yeah, I've played against like the same 6 Pokemon a lot. I'm actually really scared of them because. Just one Howl and the Baxcalibur is so explosive. Can one-shot like nearly all my Pokemon, so yeah, I just wanted to play around that as hard as possible. And I was trying not to. I want to lead Pelipper, but if he leads Fluttermane, it can destroy Pelipper, so it's really shaky.
Yeah, but obviously you made some great calls throughout that set. Like Cardsy completely around his protects. I talked to Pontus as well. He just felt like he got read like a book. So big congrats on getting this far. You're obviously heading into the final very soon. That should be a very high match, obviously, as well. Is there any shout-outs you want to give at the moment?
Too many, probably. First of all, I'll shout out my parents for supporting me the whole way. All my friends who helped me prepare. Like Sam and NJ and Brady, to name a few. There's so many. Thank you so much. It's so helpful. I couldn't do it without my friends.
Yeah,
and,
it's great that you've got a big, huge community around you. Yeah, like
so
it really builds it up, and you can really hear the crowd kind of cheering for you at the end there when you really took that win.
Also, the Irish guys. There's a lot of us out here today, so yeah, I've really enjoyed hanging out with them.
Brilliant.
their support.
Well, it's been brilliant hanging out with you here as well too, Mattie. So
Thank you so
congrats for taking the win, and good luck in the next match as well. We're going to hand it to a short break, and we'll probably be back with the next semi-final. Don't go anywhere.